I knew my sister would ask the impossible, but I didn't think it would be this. Her name was Rebecca, my older sister, and I was Caroline, the younger one, sitting at her table that smelled of cinnamon candles and fresh bread. A family dinner on the surface. But the conversation that began with small talk was about to turn into a deal that stole my breath away. "Caroline, you've always been stronger than you think," Rebecca said with a smile. It sounded like praise, but it felt like a warning. Thomas sat beside her, tapping his wedding ring against his glass. Steady, deliberate, like a metronome. On my wrist I wore a bracelet, a gift from my parents on my 18th birthday. Back then they said, "You'll always have the right to choose your own path." Tonight the metal dug into my skin, reminding me that sometimes there is no choice at all. I didn't know yet that in just a few weeks their request would turn into a command, and that would not be the end. Rebecca had always been the leader. As kids she decided who played the mother and who played the daughter. In adulthood nothing changed. Her word was always final. She had the big house in the Austin suburbs, the husband, the adopted boys. On holidays her living room smelled of bread and cinnamon, her fireplace lit, her kitchen full of noise. I used to love visiting. I thought that meant family. But this night, sitting across from her, I realized family could mean something else. I worked downtown in a small insurance office. My life was bills, a peeling apartment wall, bitter vending machine coffee, collection calls at 7 in the morning. Every day the same text. Payment overdue. That was my world. Until Rebecca and Thomas laid out an offer that sounded like salvation. They wanted a child. Not adopted. Not fostered. A child of their own blood. And for that they needed me. Thomas spoke first. His tone was calm, almost professional, like reading from a contract. A lawyer would draft the paperwork. Medical costs, clothes, housing, everything covered. And then the money. They would pay off all my student loans, cover rent for 3 years, and add almost $300,000 on top. Was this freedom? Or was I selling the last piece of myself? My parents were thrilled. "This is the greatest gift you'll ever give," my mother said. My father nodded. Family helps family. My aunt cried over the phone. Cousins texted congratulations. They all called me brave, generous, strong. And I tried to listen calmly. But deep down I knew it wasn't a gift. It was a trap. That night I went back to my apartment. The kitchen light buzzed. I sat at the table, the bracelet cold against my skin. I clicked the clasp open and shut. Each click felt like one more second closer to a decision I could never undo. I told myself again and again, "It's a chance. Don't waste it." But the bracelet slipped from my wrist and hit the table with a sharp metallic sound. A sound I couldn't ignore. But the real request was still ahead. The first days after I said yes felt like a strange dream. My phone buzzed with calls from relatives, one after another. My mother's voice was proud. My father's words were steady. My aunt left a long voicemail, crying about my sacrifice. At Sunday dinner my cousins clinked glasses. "Caroline, you're stronger than all of us," one said. I smiled, but the bracelet pinched against my wrist, cold and tight. Everyone treated me like a hero. I was supposed to feel honored. Instead I felt trapped. Rebecca sent me lists, prenatal vitamins, diet plans, schedules. She spoke like a coach before a game. "We'll do this together," she said, her hand heavy on mine. Her voice was warm, but I felt the weight of it. Each sentence carried expectation. Each glance reminded me this wasn't just about me anymore. My body had become theirs. Thomas stayed quiet most of the time. But when he did speak, his words cut through. At one dinner he tapped his fork on the plate, steady and sharp, before saying, "This is going to be the best thing that ever happened to this family." Rebecca nodded, her eyes shining with certainty. I forced a smile, chewing bread that tasted like dust. I told myself again, "It's only paperwork. It's official. Lawyers, doctors, clinics, professional, clinical, safe." That's what I believed. That's what I needed to believe. But even then the bracelet clicked when I twisted it, louder than their praise. Like it was warning me. I tried to keep busy with work. Filing claims, answering phones, sipping burnt coffee in the office kitchen. But at night I scrolled through surrogacy forums, trying to understand what I had agreed to. Words blurred on the screen, contracts, injections, complications. My stomach turned, but I clicked the bracelet shut again. Too late. You already said yes. Rebecca checked in constantly. Morning texts. Did you take your vitamins? Evening calls. Make sure you're resting. First I thought it was care. Then I felt the edge. It wasn't a question. It was monitoring. One night she said softly, Caroline, you're stronger than you think. But don't disappoint us now. My chest tightened. I realized she wasn't just my sister in this anymore. She was my overseer. And then came the night that changed everything. Rebecca invited me again for dinner. The boys were upstairs, the house quiet. Candlelight flickered. The smell of cinnamon filled the room again, sickly sweet. Dessert plates were still on the table when Thomas cleared his throat. He folded his hands and looked straight at me. We've been thinking, he said. His tone was calm, deliberate. Rebecca leaned closer, her hand brushing mine. Caroline, we want this to be as natural as possible. I froze. Natural. My voice sounded distant, too quiet. Thomas nodded. Not clinics. Not injections. Natural conception. The words sank in like ice water. I stared at him, fork still in my hand. My stomach lurched. My skin crawled. I turned to Rebecca. Her eyes were wide, pleading. She nodded. It's safer this way. Healthier for the baby. We trust Thomas's research. My bracelet cut into my wrist as I clenched my hand. I tried to steady my voice. There are other ways. Syringe. At-home insemination. We don't need. Thomas shook his head. He waved it off. Cold. Clinical. This way the energy is better. The bond is stronger. No chemicals. No interference. Rebecca's grip on my hand tightened. Her eyes shone with tears. Please, Caroline. Do this for us. For family. The cinnamon in the air made me nauseous. The ring of Thomas's glass against the table echoed in my ears. I pulled my hand back, my skin burning where hers had touched. My thoughts raced, but one truth cut through the noise. This wasn't about family. It was about control. The days after that dinner felt heavier. I tried to work, tried to focus on claims and numbers, but my mind kept circling back to Rebecca's voice and Thomas's calm certainty. The bracelet pressed against my skin as if reminding me every hour. You are no longer your own. Rebecca became constant. Morning messages. Eat oatmeal, not coffee. Midday calls. Did you walk today? Not too far. At night. Send me your weight, Caroline. At first, I typed answers with shaky fingers. Then I stopped replying. Minutes later, she would call. Her voice always gentle but sharp underneath. Don't push me away. We're in this together. My parents joined in. My mother's tone was soft, almost pleading. Caroline, this is family. Don't make this harder. My father's voice carried more weight. We raised you better than this. Honor your sister. Their words stung more than Rebecca's. The guilt was thicker than air. I walked into my apartment one evening, the hallway reeking of stale takeout, and found a note under my door. In my mother's handwriting. Don't forget what you promised. I held the paper until my hand shook. The bracelet cut into my wrist, cold and merciless. At dinner the next weekend, Rebecca watched my plate. No coffee. More greens. That's what's best, she said, sliding a bowl toward me. I nodded, chewing slowly, each bite tasting like cardboard. Thomas barely spoke, just tapped his fork in rhythm against the edge of his plate. The sound drilled into my skull. When he finally looked up, his eyes stayed on me too long. Discipline builds trust, he said flatly. Rebecca smiled as if those words were gospel. I excused myself to the bathroom, gripping the counter until my knuckles whitened. My reflection stared back. Pale skin, wide eyes, the bracelet glinting under the harsh light. I whispered to myself, it's not too late. But even I didn't believe it. My parents praised me again at Sunday lunch. My aunt clutched my hands with tears. You're saving her, Caroline. The room buzzed with approval, with blind faith. I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced a smile. Inside, I felt the walls close in. At night, I started to write down every message, every call. Pages filled with Rebecca's instructions, my parents' guilt, Thomas's clipped phrases. I told myself it was only for clarity. Deep down I knew it was evidence. I couldn't shake the feeling that this had stopped being about Rebecca. The way she deferred to Thomas, The way his words landed like commands, the way her eyes sought his approval before she spoke. It wasn't her dream anymore. It was his. One evening as I left their house, Thomas stood at the doorway holding it open. The smell of cinnamon candles followed me out. His hand brushed my arm, too slow, too deliberate. "We're counting on you," he said, his voice low. The bracelet on my wrist felt like ice. Driving home, headlights flashing across the dark highway, I gripped the steering wheel until my hands ached. The bracelet burned against my skin, as if it knew the truth before I did. The child was never meant for her. It was meant for him. I started looking closer. Small details I had ignored before became sharper. Rebecca left folders on the kitchen counter, neat stacks with color-coded tabs. Insurance papers, banknotes, draft contracts. One afternoon while she was upstairs, I glanced at a page left open. Thomas's name was on every line. Legal guardian, beneficiary, decision maker. Rebecca's signature appeared below his, small and rushed. My own name wasn't there at all. The bracelet felt heavier on my wrist, like it was pulling me down. When Rebecca came back, I snapped the folder shut. She didn't notice. She smiled, carrying laundry, humming as if nothing was wrong. I forced a smile back, but my chest tightened. The house didn't feel the same anymore. Once it had been loud, messy, full of children's laughter. Now every sound felt jagged. The boys shouted upstairs, one of them crying, the other banging on the wall. Rebecca's face tightened. "Thomas, do something," she said. He didn't move. He just stared at me, calm, unblinking as the noise grew louder. She finally went upstairs, her voice sharp. The boys fell silent. The quiet was worse. At dinner, Rebecca placed bread on the table. The smell of cinnamon filled the room again, but it no longer felt warm. It was heavy, suffocating. Thomas tapped his wedding ring against his glass, slow and deliberate. Rebecca looked at him before she spoke. "We're almost ready to move forward," she said softly. "But Caroline," her eyes searched mine, "we need your full trust." I nodded. I had practiced the gesture. Polite, obedient, empty. Inside I felt the walls closing in. That night I wrote down everything I had seen in her folders. I underlined Thomas's name again and again. Beneficiary, guardian, control. Days blurred together. Work became mechanical. Answering phones, stamping forms, nodding at clients. But in my head, every detail replayed. Rebecca's lists. Thomas's ring tapping. My parents' calls. Each moment layering into something unbearable. One evening, after another forced dinner, I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I twisted the bracelet on my wrist. It clicked over and over, each sound sharp in the silence. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were hollow, my shoulders stiff. I whispered, "They're not saving me. They're using me." Back in the living room, the boys were restless, fighting over toys. Rebecca raised her voice. "Stop it. Stop it now." Her tone was sharp, desperate. For the first time I saw annoyance instead of care. She turned away, rubbing her temples. Thomas leaned back in his chair, eyes on me, calm as ever. I gathered my bag to leave. As I stood, the bracelet slid from my wrist. It hit the hardwood floor with a metallic crack. The sound cut through the room. Rebecca glanced over but said nothing. Thomas's eyes followed the bracelet as it lay on the floor between us. I bent down, picked it up and slipped it back on. The metal was cold against my skin. The warning was louder than ever. If I said no, they wouldn't stop. They would find another way to force me. The shift happened fast. One week they were praising me. The next the tone had changed. My mother called early one morning, her voice sharp. "Caroline, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Rebecca is counting on you. We all are." My father didn't yell, but his words cut deeper. "You're acting selfish. Do you want to see this family fall apart?" I sat on the edge of my bed. The phone pressed to my ear, the bracelet heavy on my wrist. Selfish. The word echoed in my head long after the call ended. At Sunday dinner, the house felt different. The smell of cinnamon was there, but it was sour now, cloying. Rebecca's smile looked thin, her eyes red. Relatives gathered around the table. My aunt whispered, "Don't let them down." My cousin muttered, "Some people forget what family means." All eyes fell on me. I forced a smile, but my throat was tight. Then Thomas spoke. His fork tapped once, sharp against the plate. The room went silent. He leaned forward, his voice calm but cold. We made an agreement. You are our hope. His words were not a plea. They were a command. Rebecca nodded beside him, her hand resting on his. Caroline, please. Don't ruin this. We've trusted you. Her voice cracked, but her gaze didn't waver. She was no longer my sister at that table. She was his echo. I felt the bracelet cut into my skin. My chest tightened, breath shallow. For a moment I thought I might break, might agree to anything just to stop the weight pressing down on me. But then something shifted inside. That night in my apartment I opened my notebook. I began to record everything with precision. Dates, times, exact words, copies of texts. I even saved voicemails from my parents, from Rebecca, from Thomas. Each page filled with evidence, each line a small act of defiance. I searched online forums, blogs, legal advice threads. Words like coercion, consent, surrogacy rights. I scribbled names of lawyers I couldn't yet afford. My fingers shook as I typed, but I didn't stop. The bracelet clicked as I twisted it, louder than the hum of the kitchen light. Each click reminded me they wanted control. But control could be broken. The next evening, Rebecca came by unannounced. She stood in my doorway, a forced smile on her lips. Caroline, we just want what's best. Behind her, Thomas lingered near the stairwell, silent, his eyes fixed on me. His presence filled the hallway, heavy, suffocating. I stepped back, gripping the edge of the door. I need time, I said quietly. Rebecca's smile faltered. Time. Her voice trembled. Caroline, you can't walk away now. You promised. Thomas finally spoke, his tone even, cutting through the space between us. This isn't about walking away. This is about family. And family doesn't quit. The bracelet slid on my wrist, cold as ice. For the first time I didn't feel only fear. I felt anger. I closed the door slowly, their shadows still visible through the glass. I leaned against the wall, heart pounding. My hands shook, but I managed to write down every word they had said. Then I whispered to myself, steady and clear. They will regret underestimating me. I stopped pretending. The mask of obedience had cracked, and I didn't bother to repair it. Each time Rebecca called, I answered with short words, writing everything down as she spoke. Each time my parents left a voicemail, I saved it. My notebook grew thicker, pages filled with dates, times, phrases. The bracelet clicked on my wrist whenever I turned the pages, like a metronome keeping track of my defiance. I went further. At work, I used the office copier after hours. Contracts, texts, bank drafts. Anything I could find when I visited Rebecca's house. Once, when she left her bag by the counter, I slipped into her folder and copied 2 documents before she returned. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the papers, but I didn't stop. What I found made my stomach turn. The money they promised me, student loans paid, rent covered, $300,000 in cash, was already accounted for. On paper, it was listed under Thomas's business expenses. Part of it tied to their mortgage, part to a new expansion loan for his company. My name appeared only once, not as a beneficiary, but as service rendered. Service. That was what I was to them. The bracelet pressed against my wrist as I gripped the papers. For the first time I didn't feel shame. I felt resolve. At dinner the following week, Rebecca's voice trembled when she tried to smile. Caroline, you don't look well. Are you eating properly? Her hand hovered near mine, but her eyes flicked toward Thomas before landing back on me. Thomas cut in. She'll be fine. Discipline builds strength. He tapped his ring against the glass again, steady, sharp. Every sound was a nail in the coffin of their illusion. I nodded once, silent, storing every word. That night, I spread the documents on my kitchen table. The hum of the fridge filled the silence. I photographed each page, backed them up to the cloud, sent copies to a private email. My notebook now had an alias, a password, a second lock. The bracelet clicked as I fastened it tighter. No longer just a reminder of my parents' promise but of my own. Rebecca's messages grew more desperate. Caroline, please don't distance yourself. We need unity. My mother's calls turned sharper. Your behavior is cruel. Don't shame us. I wrote every word, recorded every call. The evidence stacked higher than their guilt. One evening, I overheard a conversation as I passed through their house. Rebecca was upstairs, her voice cracked with tears. Thomas, she's slipping away. His reply was low, controlled. Then we tightened the rope. I froze in the hallway, the bracelet cold against my pulse. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of their words. I was ready for them. Back in my apartment, I looked at the pages spread across the table, the weight of proof stronger than any plea. The bracelet clicked as I shut the notebook. Each sound was no longer a countdown. It was a strike of the clock. I wasn't carrying their child. I was carrying their downfall. The final break came on a Thursday. Rebecca invited me to dinner again, insisting the whole family would be there. My parents, my aunt, cousins. A full table, heavy with food and expectation. Cinnamon filled the air as always, but this time it turned my stomach. I walked in carrying a plain folder. The bracelet was on my wrist, clasped so tight it cut the skin. Every click of it in the car on the way over had sounded like a drumbeat. A warning. And now a promise. Dinner began with small talk. Rebecca smiled too brightly, her voice cracking when she tried to compliment me. Caroline, you've been such a blessing. We'll look back and see this as the moment our family grew stronger. My mother nodded, my father muttered agreement. Cousins whispered to each other. Thomas stayed quiet, just watching me. His hand tapped the table once, twice. His calmness was heavier than any words. I placed the folder on the table. The sound echoed. Rebecca froze, her smile faltering. These are copies, I said evenly. My voice didn't shake. Contracts. Bank drafts. Messages. Every word. Every promise. Every threat. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw clenched. Rebecca's eyes darted to Thomas. He didn't move. He just sat there, his eyes locked on me. I opened the folder and slid a page forward. The money you promised me. It's already assigned to your mortgage. To your business expansion. I was never part of the plan. Not as family. Not as a person. Only as a service. Rebecca reached for the paper, but her hand trembled. Caroline, please, this isn't. I cut her off. Stop. You let him write my life into his contracts. You stood there and nodded. And you called it family. My aunt gasped. My cousins exchanged shocked looks. The room was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. I unclasped the bracelet. The sound was sharp in the stillness. I set it on the table, the metal glinting under the light. This was supposed to remind me of choice. Tonight it reminds me of freedom. And it is no longer yours to twist. Rebecca's face crumpled. Tears slid down her cheeks. My mother whispered her name, but no one moved. No one defended her. Thomas leaned back, his jaw tight, but he didn't speak. For the first time, he wasn't in control. I stood, slid the folder across the table. Keep your papers. I have my copies. And from now on, every step you take will be watched. I left the house without looking back. The night air was cold, clean, sharp. The bracelet was no longer on my wrist. My arm felt lighter. My chest steady. For the first time, I believed myself when I whispered, "It's over."